So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, buenos días. I am CR. Oh my God. So you have been dancing the whole night? Yeah. So, welcome again to Madrid. We hope you enjoy our first session yesterday. We always in Madrid ask and pray for water, and yesterday we have plenty of water. You could check it yesterday, and we want to thank and give an applause to our cleaning staff, technical staff, faculty staff, because they have been an incredible work for having the session like today. Yeah, technician staff and, well, translation staff, they were not working yesterday at the rain, but we thanked their work because it's also very, very important for us. So today we have our second plenary sessions with focus on communication, technology, and freedom. And before we start, we will have the 2019 Harvard I. Schiller Award will be given, and then Professor Miguel Vicente from Valladolid University in Spain will introduce the speakers. And as we said yesterday, before we begin, I may say a few words about the organization of a plenary. First, in your package and in the screen, you will find the indications to the access to Wi-Fi, so you could easily connect. If you sit in the first rows, you will have better connections because antennas are close here. So during the plenaries, we will have interventions in English and in Spanish. So please download the application Odyssey that you will have also in your batch, the indications for downloading. And you could introduce the username and the keywords as indicated in the screen. That is, the user is IAMCR, and the PIN code is 2019, as you could see also in the screen. So you could also use the headphones that you have in your package, and you could listen the channel in English or in Spanish. We want to remember you that you have the editors and the publishers space in the hall, in the main building, in the lobby of the main building. And we have there Emerald Publishing, Fragua, ICA, Intellect, Roman and Littlefield, Sage Publishing, Springer Nature, Taylor and Francis, and Willie. And they are waiting for you with the novelties of the publishers. And if you want to ask, we remember you the hashtag for making questions that we use, the hashtag AskIAMCR, and in Twitter for sharing the special moments we use IAMCR 2019. So thank you very much for coming. And the word is for Elisa Bray, that is going to speak in Spanish and French.
Bonjour, ce sera juste un petit mot en français y principalmente hablaré en español para que tengáis todos la información. Hoy en esta segunda sesión el lema y la temática central es de comunicación, tecnología y libertad. Pero antes de empezar el debate daremos el premio, bueno, la Asociación Internacional de Estudios de Comunicación Social entregará el premio a la memoria Herbert E. Schiller. Y luego el profesor Miguel Vicente de la Universidad de Valladolid introducirá los ponentes para la sesión plenaria. Os recordamos muy brevemente unas cuestiones logísticas antes de comenzar el contenido de la sesión. Primero, para la conexión al Wi-Fi os recomendamos acercaros porque funciona mejor en las primeras filas. Tenéis toda la información en la tarjetita que viene en el lanyards, tanto para la clave de Wi-Fi, que se da en 2 pasos, aquí también lo tenéis en la pantalla. También tenéis la información sobre la aplicación de la traducción, All You Say. Lo podéis bajar y una vez descargada entrar en la aplicación, introducir el usuario IAMCR y la contraseña 2019. Para las plenarias podéis invitar a la gente a participar. Bueno, podéis incluir vuestras preguntas a través del hashtag #AskIAMCR solamente para las plenarias, y para el Congreso en general podéis incluir cualquier comentario o noticia en Twitter con el hashtag IAMCR 2019. Como os decimos antes, queremos demostrar que somos expertos en comunicación y que Twitter nos permita visibilizar el Congreso y todos vuestros trabajos. Así que sin más, aparte de invitaros a ir a visitar nuestras editoriales, al final de la plenaria, cuando tengáis un rato, un momento libre, damos el paso a Janet Vasco, presidenta de IAMCR, para que entregue el premio. Muchas gracias y que disfruten de los contenidos de hoy. Gracias.
Those people were tall. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome again. Glad to see you all here for the second plenary. We are going to take every possible chance to thank the organizing committee. It's doing a fantastic job. Thank you. I have only one announcement before we make the award, and it's to repeat an event that will happen at 1 o'clock, and this will be an information session about the new research fund that we have arranged with UNICEF. It's the UNICEF IAMCR Communication for Development Research Fund. At 1 o'clock in the Sala de Conferencias, which is right there, there'll be just an information session, so that's at 1 o'clock today. I'm very proud to be able to introduce one of our international council members and the chairman of the committee that chose the 2019 Herbert I. Schiller Memorial Award. Rick Maxwell and his committee did a great job, and we're really excited to, again, acknowledge some great research by some of our young researchers. So Richard.
Headroom. Mike. Thank you all. Buenos días a todos. I'm here to announce the winner of the Herbert Schiller Award for the IAMCR 2019, but I want to point out that 2019 also marks the 100th anniversary of his birth, so we are here on a very special occasion. So let's hear it for the spirit of Herbert Schiller. Thank you very much. My fellow committee members, or co-conspirators, were Elena Sousa and Pei-Shi Chung, so I want to thank them wherever they are out there, probably still asleep. But thank you for working so hard to come to this difficult conclusion for a very good paper which we chose. I don't know if the authors of the paper are present, but I want to read their names. And if they're in the audience, please come up here. Pooja Ichplani, Archana Kumar, Rupa Udapai, and Jessica Mayberry. Yes. Pooja? Yes. Please, the title of their paper, come up. As they come up the stairs, I'll announce the title of the paper was Communication Processes, Community Mobilization and Normative Shifts, Learnings from Video Volunteers, India Unheard Program. And I wanted to say a few words. The committee really appreciated the socially relevant nature of the research project and the collaborative research that they did together. But I also want to point out the activist spirit of the paper was something Herb really would have loved. It really mixed the theory and the praxis in a way that balanced out the kinds of things that I think those of us who followed Herb's work would have I found exemplary in this particular paper. So once again, I want to thank the winners of the 2019 Herbert I. Schiller Award and give them this commemorative plaque. I wish I had plaques for everybody, but it's so nice. You can say one or two words. Very briefly. Headroom.
Good morning, everybody. It's a very overwhelming feeling to get this award and to be honored with the Herbert Schiller Award. That's something that I'm thrilled with, and I'm sure that my professor here is also very proud of me. And I thank you, ma'am, for supervising me in this research. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to remind everyone that we do we do award something similar to the Schiller Award every 3 years. We have an award commemorating Dallas Smythe and an award commemorating Stuart Hall. We encourage you to apply, and we encourage you to encourage others, students and so forth, your students to apply when they're announced. So thank you very much, and enjoy the plenary.
Joan. Yeah. Malavik.
Thank you. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todo el mundo. Bonjour. We are here to conduct our second plenary session, which is titled Communication, Technology and Freedom. We are coming from a brilliant, fascinating first plenary session based and focused on dignity. And communication, technology and freedom are prerequisites and are strongly related with dignity. We as a Communication Research Association really need to work and to advocate for a freedom of speech, freedom of communication, and for a respectful use of technology. Communication is not only a goal, freedom is not only the goal, it's the process, it's the way to achieve these rights. It's not an end, it's mainly a mean. And as a mean, we want to use this session as a space for dialogue between three relevant scholars, practitioners involved in the communication research field. Right before presenting the three of them, I will explain you briefly which is the procedure that we will be following during this session. The three of them will present their keynotes for approximately 15-20 minutes, and then we want you all to get involved in the conversation. And we have different means, different ways to achieve this objective. First of all, we'll have two of our international local organizing committee scholars, Dane and Cecilia, that will be collecting questions from the floor, from our on-site audience. They will bring me those questions, and I will synthesize, I will select some of them and present to our presenters. Second step, we want to give even more visibility to sections and working groups in this association, which is really the backbone of the organization. And we encourage chairs, vice chairs, and the chairing teams to also participate when they are called and present their interests and their questions afterwards. And third, and last but not least, we are also having a huge and growing online audience. All these keynotes are being streamed, and we have an active participation in Twitter. So we kindly invite all our online audiences to share their questions, to share their comments in Twitter. We have a general IM hashtag, which is IAMCR 2019 for all the comments, but we also have one specific for those questions that want to be addressed to the three participants presenting here their keynotes. So this specific hashtag is Ask IAMCR. we will have another of our two local organizing committee international scholars, Nancy and Urwa, that will be collecting these questions coming from the Twitter feed, and they will also present a synthesis of that conversation and also some questions from the audience. Having said so, I am really pleased to introduce my three invited speakers here in the plenary session. They are Joanny Sanchez, Malavika Hayaram, and Monroe Price. We will be starting the presentation with the contribution from Joanny Sanchez. Joanny is a journalist and she's the author of the blog, which is Y Generation. It's a real valid and exemplary reference in the Latin American field of the struggle and the consequences and the difficulties to achieve freedom of speech and to exert all the communication rights that we have been fighting for during the last decades. During the last years, she has been in charge of this blog, which is turned into a valid reference for journalism, for open and critic journalism. In 2008, she won one of the most prestigious awards in Spain, which is awarded by El País, and also was included among the most influential people. At that time, there was no influencers yet, but she was clearly influential in the way. So she is presenting here some of her reflections of the last experiences and years, and I'm very happy to give the floor to Joanny.
Muchísimas gracias por esa presentación. Gracias por la invitación. Voy a hablar en español. Cuando me invitaron a este evento, redacté un texto que quiero compartir hoy con ustedes y que le puse un título de trabajo. Se llama La dignidad no cabe en una pantalla. Así que ahora estas palabras. La pasada semana, justo cuando me preparaba para llegar a este evento, se publicó el informe que redactó la alta comisionada de Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos, Michelle Bachelet, sobre la situación en Venezuela. Creo que todos hemos sabido algo sobre el informe. Un detallado reporte de violaciones de libertades, ejecuciones extrajudiciales y miedos que han llevado a una de las naciones más prósperas de nuestro continente a la catástrofe económica, social y humanitaria. Me leí ese reporte como quien revisa una historia conocida. ¿Han repasado alguna vez un texto que cuente una historia tan cercana que les resulte dolorosa? Un libro que tengan que alejar, una página del periódico que deban cerrar, una pantalla de un ordenador que se vean obligados a apagar porque es demasiado familiar. Pues eso fue exactamente lo que sentí. Sin embargo, una vez pasado ese dolor inicial, empecé a revisar cómo había sido visto el informe de Bachelet por parte del oficialismo cubano. Ese régimen que por más de 60 años ha logrado crear su propia burbuja informativa, su posverdad maquillada, su fake news perenne. Como era de esperar, el reporte de la expresidenta chilena no ha gustado a la Plaza de la Revolución de La Habana, que la ha acusado de padecer amnesia y de hacer una valoración distorsionada de lo que ocurre en la cuna del chavismo. Esa mirada crítica sobre la recepción del informe ganó fuerza para hacerme transformar un tanto mi exposición de hoy, porque cuando acepté la invitación a participar en este congreso anual de la Asociación Internacional de Estudios en Comunicación Social, lo hice fundamentalmente porque junto a conceptos que tienen mucho que ver con mi vida y mi trabajo profesional, como la comunicación y las tecnologías, estaba otro que determina, condiciona y debería ser el motor impulsor de todos nosotros y que se resume en la frase dignidad humana. La dignidad humana no solo pasa por ser respetados y por hacer valer nuestra libre elección, porque se reconozcan nuestros derechos y se nos ofrezca un marco propicio para ejercerlos, sino que pasa también y muy especialmente por denunciar, combatir y erradicar toda práctica discriminatoria. En este siglo XXI en que vivimos, negarle el acceso a la información, menoscabar el derecho a saber, amordazar a una sociedad para que no pueda decir o decidir constituye un ataque a la dignidad individual y colectiva. Por eso me sacudió especialmente el informe sobre la situación en Venezuela, porque veía reflejado en sus numerosas páginas lo que ya había ido sabiendo a través de las historias que los propios venezolanos contaban en redes. Cuando se vive bajo un régimen autoritario, en un país donde los medios de prensa han sido cerrados, amenazados o abducidos por grupos cercanos al oficialismo, las redes sociales, los foros, los chats y la mensajería instantánea se convierten en la plaza virtual de denuncia y debate. En Venezuela, al igual que en Cuba, el país donde vivo y trabajo como periodista independiente, las nuevas tecnologías han evitado el enmudecimiento total de la ciudadanía, la mordaza absoluta a partir de la coacción, el miedo y el desmantelamiento de buena parte de la prensa que una vez se distribuyó en papel. Hace 12 años, cuando abrí mi blog Generación Y, me gustaba pensar que esa bitácora digital era como un exorcismo personal, a través del cual expulsaba a los demonios del miedo, el silencio, la inacción y la apatía política que me habían acompañado buena parte de mi vida. Creía que bastaba decir, empezar a hablar y contar un país a través de la ventana que ofrecían las nuevas herramientas tecnológicas. No me había percatado todavía, en aquellos primeros años, que todo proceso de expresión es a su vez un camino de recuperación de la dignidad perdida, un sendero que nos devuelve trozos de humanidad que la censura y el castigo nos quitaron. Pero las nuevas tecnologías no vienen con una ética intrínseca. En sus circuitos, teclados y pantallas no late el código binario de la justicia, ni del respeto al otro. Tampoco en su armazón se ha incluido la obligatoriedad de usarlas para el desarrollo, la promoción de la diversidad o la armonía. Como mismo los teléfonos móviles o los ordenadores y las pequeñas memorias USB apoyan a los ciudadanos en la recuperación de su voz, contribuyen a que se junten alrededor de una causa y a que influyan sobre su realidad. Al otro lado, las viejas tijeras de la censura también echan mano de los nuevos dispositivos y funcionalidades. Así, muchos gobiernos le han declarado la guerra a la libertad de expresión también en las redes sociales y en el ciberespacio. En esa contienda emplean ejércitos de trolls y ciberpolicías que intimidan, acosan y distorsionan los debates sobre temas candentes. También utilizan el mundo virtual para rastrear a los ciudadanos, monitorearlos y acumular información que puedan usar en su contra, a lo que se suman las cada vez más sofisticadas campañas de fusilamiento de la reputación y el linchamiento mediático de las voces más críticas, esta vez apoyadas por la viralidad de las redes. A eso hay que agregarle que en los países donde estos fenómenos se dan con más fuerza, casi siempre hay también, qué casualidad, una legislación que pone riendas bastante cortas y estrechas a las expresiones de los ciudadanos en el mundo digital, el tipo de contenido al que pueden acceder o el que pueden publicar. En el caso de mi país, la semana pasada se ha hecho pública una nueva legislación que en más de 100 páginas intenta regular los pequeños espacios de libertades que los cubanos habíamos logrado crear en las redes. A falta de plazas físicas donde debatir temas trascendentales sobre nuestra realidad, muchas de las grandes discusiones nacionales se fueron pasando a lo largo de la última década hacia la gran telaraña mundial. Empezamos a ser ciudadanos primero en Internet antes de que poder llegar a serlo en el mundo físico. Las críticas a la gestión gubernamental, el cuestionamiento de una nueva constitución que intenta dejar al castrismo atado y bien atado por los siglos de los siglos, las críticas a la prohibición de que existan otros partidos políticos más allá del único que está permitido por ley en mi país, que es el Partido Comunista, la diatriba sobre sus líderes, unos líderes que nadie eligió en las urnas, pero que dirigen el país como un feudo propio, en fin, todos esos temas y muchos más empezaron a ser comentados y discutidos por los cubanos en la misma medida en que las nuevas tecnologías se extendían por el país. A pesar de eso, y para hacer la historia corta, a pesar de eso y a pesar de ser una de las naciones del planeta con menor conectividad a Internet, menos presencia de la telefonía celular y para colmo, contenida en una isla, como diría el poeta Virgilio Piñera, la maldita circunstancia del agua por todas partes. a lo que habría que agregar, y del control por todas partes, y de la vigilancia por todas partes, y de la censura por todas partes. Pues a pesar de todo eso, en menos de una década, las nuevas tecnologías redefinieron el rostro informativo del país. De manera que cuando en diciembre del año pasado y por primera vez el gobierno cubano se decidió a abrir finalmente el servicio de navegación web desde los teléfonos móviles, algo se quebró aún más en el monopolio sobre la circulación y el consumo de información, que de manera tan sistemática el oficialismo había erigido por casi 6 décadas. Los cubanos entramos como una tromba marina en las redes, a pesar incluso de los altísimos precios, donde un paquete de 4 gigabytes de navegación cuesta el equivalente al salario mensual de un ingeniero. No obstante los altos costos, los innumerables sitios digitales censurados, como el diario digital 14 y medio del que soy directora y que está bloqueado en los servidores nacionales desde el mismo día en que se fundó, en mayo de 2014, no obstante todo eso, han bastado 7 meses, solo 7 meses, para que el acceso a Internet haya cambiado buena parte de la manera en que el mundo nos ve y cómo nos vemos a nosotros mismos. Pero también ha hecho tambalear la seguridad que sentía el régimen de tener todo bajo control. ¿Cómo ha pasado eso? En enero pasado, un teléfono móvil captó las primeras imágenes del rechazo ciudadano a un líder oficialista cubano, que habían podido ser grabadas en más de medio siglo, las primeras. El video llegó en pocos minutos a Internet y obligó a las autoridades a intentar negarlo, tacharlo de manipulación y de fake news. En febrero, la campaña por votar no a la nueva Constitución de la República generó una oleada de adhesiones en las redes sociales y llevó a que, en un gesto inédito, cerca de 2 millones de electores se desmarcaron de la Carta Magna, acudiendo al voto negativo a través de la abstención, las boletas en blanco o las anuladas. Aunque la Constitución fue aprobada, el rechazo que había nacido en las redes sociales quedó reflejado en las urnas. En mayo, una convocatoria a una marcha independiente en apoyo a las demandas de la comunidad LGBTI pasó de los kilobytes a las calles, del mundo virtual al mundo real. Cerca de 300 personas se congregaron en una céntrica calle de La Habana con banderas multicolores, después de haberse organizado a través de Facebook y Twitter. La policía reprimió con violencia la demostración y el mito, fabricado con esmero, de un oficialismo cubano más tolerante con la diversidad, se hizo pedazo en cuestión de minutos. Toda esa secuencia de hechos y otros tantos que serían muy largos de enumerar han ido retando a un sistema político formado en los tiempos analógicos, acostumbrado a imprimir sus propios titulares para tratar de conformar realidades a partir de ellos, incapaz de adaptarse a los nuevos tiempos del flujo informativo más veloz y más libre. Así que ha respondido como sabe hacer, con una legislación mordaza que intenta poner freno a muchos de estos fenómenos ciudadanos e informativos. La nueva legislación penaliza la opinión porque considera una contravención, y aquí voy a citar, difundir a través de las redes públicas de transmisión de datos información contraria al interés social, la moral, las buenas costumbres y la integridad de las personas. Cierro la cita. Un elástico concepto en el que cabe desde la crítica a un funcionario hasta una denuncia por un agujero que lleva 20 años en una calle sin que el Estado haga nada para repararlo. La misma semana en que salía publicada esta legislación draconiana para regular a los cubanos en las redes, se daba también a conocer el informe de Naciones Unidas sobre Venezuela. Un reporte que nos resultó muy familiar en la isla, no solo porque buena parte de las violaciones de derechos humanos que aparecen reflejadas en sus páginas las hemos vivido nosotros en carne propia, sino también porque la actual situación de ese país suramericano ha sido en parte provocada por el régimen de La Habana. Fue muy simbólico, muy simbólico, que justo esas redes sociales y esa Internet que la nueva legislación mordaza quiere controlar fueron las que nos han permitido acceder al reporte venezolano que la prensa oficial cubana ha censurado. Después de terminar de leerlo, es fácil comprender por qué los regímenes autoritarios quieren acabar con nuestra dignidad como internautas, porque es una forma de recortar también nuestra dignidad como seres humanos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Joanny. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. We have seen the distance from the opportunities of the digital society to the limitations and control, public and private, that can also occur in these circumstances. We will now move to our second presenter. It's right on my left-hand side. She's Malavika Hayaram, technology lawyer. She's the executive director of the Digital Asia Hub. She has a long experience in terms of law and practicing all the legal aspects of communication. Her perspective is especially suitable for this plenary because all the things that we are discussing here, communication freedom, need to have a regulatory framework, and this regulatory framework leads to their further application. And I'm sure that Malavika will explain us detailedly and accurately all these issues. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think every communications conference needs to have one terrible lawyer, and I'm happy to volunteer to be that person because there's actually a good lawyer next to me. I wanted to talk about algorithms and AI because I think that's something that people often think of as a first world problem, but I think like most other problems that we didn't create, it disproportionately affects people in my part of the world. So this is what, oops. This is what I woke up to this morning. Kind of a weird little story. You're used to hearing about all the different ways in which credit scoring happens. The usual bogeyman is about China and the social credit score. But this was kind of quirky and interesting to me because it was about how it's a weird confluence of a very famous religious leader, an old saint in India called Sai Baba, as well as a really famous musician who makes Tamil songs for hit Tamil musicals and movies, in what I think is one of the weirdest pictures I've ever seen of a keyboard/piano/circular matrix. And it's basically about how this was used to spy on your phone using every single data point that you can imagine to actually give you a credit score. And it looks at, every time you're listening to religious information or talks or lectures from this saint, lessons about his life, or listening to pop songs written by this musician, all of these apps are actually collecting information that is being used to assess about 10,000 different data points about you towards deciding something as essential as whether you should get a loan or not, whether you're a bad credit risk. And it's really interesting because there's no consent involved. None of the people realize that their data is being collected for this purpose, which is not new in this space. The other thing that was interesting was I also woke up to this, which is that the Indian government is planning to roll out a facial recognition system at exactly the same time that California is banning it. Somerville in Boston is thinking of banning it. And just as the rest of the world is deciding that facial recognition is so creepy and invasive that we need to put an embargo on its development, in my part of the world, we're thinking this is such an excellent idea, let's roll it out every way that we can. For policing, for surveillance, for crowd control, for national security. And here is the third example I wanted to use, which is I live in Hong Kong, and recently with the protests that have been going on, instead of using their octopus cards, which they can pay for and get preferential subsidized rates on the subway system, students are lining up for hours to actually get single-use cards because they don't want to be tracked as they go to protests or go back from protests. They're paying more to safeguard their privacy, which kind of bucks this whole idea that A, young kids are apathetic about privacy or don't care about surveillance, and also that privacy is a luxury. The fourth picture I wanted to show you was, this is Richard Lee in New Zealand. All the poor guy was trying to do was, sorry, I haven't been clicking forward. That was the facial recognition. This is Hong Kong. And this is poor Richard Lee. All he was trying to do is to renew his passport, and he was trying to upload his picture. And he kept getting an error message saying that it couldn't upload because the subject's eyes were closed. Not that he was Asian, not that that's what he looks like, but that his eyes were closed. And we see so many other examples of this where Asian faces aren't recognized, they're blinking, they're laughing, they're crying, they're sleeping, just because systems they're not trained on data sets that are representative enough and that are unbiased and that actually think this is a genuine face and a legitimate expression. So much so that Joy Buolamwini, when she was at the Media Lab at MIT, was actually trying to look at how facial recognition systems recognize black faces or other ethnic minorities. And while all her friends at the Media Lab were recognized instantly on different computer systems, she wasn't. As a joke, she picked up a white mask, covered her face, and it recognized her instantly. Which is creepy in all kinds of ways. And I think for a lot of us who don't want to be recognized by systems, it's really galling to think we have to pretend to be white people to be recognized by systems that ultimately are going to disenfranchise us. So there's all kinds of meta creepiness going on there. And I think all of these 5 examples get at something that is very fundamental in this space. This is sort of the most traditional representative of a black box. And a lot of systems now, this is sort of the traditional representation of how algorithms and artificial intelligence are actually encoding biases, are actually making decisions in an automated way. And you have all kinds of input that goes in at one end, you have output that comes out at the other end. And so there are 3 different ways that you can actually research for fairness, for representativeness, and for equality. And for non-discrimination before the law. You could study the input, look at the data that's going in, see if it's clean, if it's representative, if the sources of data are the right ones. You can look at provenance and source. Or you could look at output and see if the output indicates that there's something skewy that happened in the middle of the system. Or you could actually make the black box more scrutable and transparent. All 3 are things that people are working on right now. Which doesn't mean we're any closer to finding solutions, but I think there's a lot of really useful work that's being done here at every level of this scheme. And I think we focus a lot on bias in this space, and here's a slightly contrary opinion where we hear so much about bias, and someone says, in a recent piece by Data and Society, Kinjal Dave says that we have to stop overusing the word bias because bias is something that operates at an individual level. It's person to person. Whereas when we do this in a very ubiquitous way, we ignore the fact that language has been designed to elide and ignore structural inequalities, that bias is a systemic problem. It's a historical problem. It's a socio-technical problem. It's not just humans are biased or a particular demographic of people are biased. It is actually something much more fundamental and structural. So we have to tackle all of these problems, not just individual sources of bias, racism, etc. We ran a conference about artificial intelligence and inclusion, and there were a lot of really interesting questions that came out that I posed here, but I'm not going to go into discussing all of them. I can share this, the slides will be available, but these are the kinds of things that I think are really, really interesting in this space where people are asking questions about, is bias, when we look at bias of systems, are we trying to get AI to be representative of reality and actually use data that exists in the real world, or actually trying to have something that's aspirational? Do we expect our systems to encode something even better than the reality of the data that is input into the system? How can we create AI that helps to benefit those who have the least to do with creating it? How can we make visible, and I think this is really, really key when we talk about the developing world and especially Asia, how do we make visible the bodies that do the labor of supporting AI and creating a new labor framework? There are people in the Philippines who do nothing but click images of penises to check if they're dick pics or if they're art, to decide whether they meet content moderation guidelines, whether they meet community standards. We don't talk about the fact that a lot of allegedly automated systems rely on very real human labor to actually implement these systems. They stand on the shoulders of real work being done by people under really distressing conditions. And that's something we don't really talk about in this space. We talk a lot about how we should get everyone to code. We should get women to code. We should get kids to code. We should get minorities to code. We never talk about getting technologies to study ethics, to get technologists to study law, to study norms, to study philosophy. So I think all of these are really important questions if we want to discuss communications technology and freedom. We also need to talk about opt-outs. Do I have a right to actually not be algorithmically governed? Can I click an app to say delete all of my information? The European Union is trying to do this with young people, saying at the point that they gain adulthood, they have the right to almost have a reset button where every single silly image that their parents posted about them online, with absolutely no care about how it would affect them in the future, the agency that they have, the self-determination that they have about the image they want to put out into the world, that was done without their permission or consent. Do they have a right to reset when they grow up to be adults and say, I would now like to actually enforce my own identity in the outside world, or actually opt out of being engaged online? So I think these are a lot of really interesting questions in this space. One of my favorite papers that deals with all of this and much more is this paper on fairness and abstraction in socio-technical systems. It's a really interesting intersectional group of people, lawyers, computer scientists, AI, machine learning specialists, and they actually tackle what I think are really important in this space. They talk about 5 traps. The framing trap, which is no mystery to people who work in communications like all of you. If you frame the algorithm as the only focus of your inquiry, and you study whether the algorithm is fair, you're actually missing out on the system into which it's embedded, the people and the actors and the stakeholders that will actually enable that algorithm to perform as intended or with all kinds of weird unintended consequences. The portability trap is where a system designed for one context, for one purpose, once it exists, it's really seductive to say, oh, I'm just going to use this, why reinvent the wheel, and port it over to another context, another region, another country, another language or demographic that it actually might not be fit for purpose for. The formalism trap is a little less relevant here, but the solutionism trap, I think, is fascinating because it's kind of in the sort of Evgeny Morozovian view of solutionism is often you have solutions in search of problems, and nowhere more so than in Asia, where you're always asking, where can I use AI, rather than what is the problem that I'm trying to solve. It's always a company trying to capture a particular aspect of government. It's governments getting into bed with the big tech companies to automate something. It's trying to make smart cities while making humans dumber and dumber. And I think it's this, it's sort of this myth about how technology will solve every single problem as we disempower people more and more and give them less and less agency around things that really affect their lives at very fundamental levels. And I think the ripple effect trap is also fascinating because it talks about how when you embed a technology into a socio-technical system, you often ignore the ripple effects of this onto every other aspect of a system. One of the examples that exemplifies this is if you come up with something that scores recidivism or looks at people's chances of reoffending and what kind of sentence they should receive. If you come up with some kind of algorithm that allocates a score to people, are judges if you just stopped at that and said, here's the score, we're embedding it in the judicial system, off you go, the problem is solved, you're actually missing the fact that once it's embedded in a judicial system, judges may either say, oh, this is great, I can be asleep at the wheel because here's something that gives me an automated score and I'm just going to follow this blindly. So the problem when this happens is judges are going to stop using their discretion, stop looking at nuance, and stop making case-by-case judgments around edge cases, around outliers, which can actually have deeply profound implications for people who don't fit neatly into boxes, as most people do. And the other opposite effect is where judges, whether they have big egos or think that algorithms are untested and not something that we should rely on completely just yet, they could look at a score like this. Seriously, I've had 10 years of training. I went to law school. I went to Harvard. You think I'm going to let a score automated by a machine tell me how to do my job? I don't think so. And they might go completely the other extreme to actually not implement the score, even if, as a lot of research shows, sound or methodologically rigorous or not, that judges make really different decisions based on whether they're making that decision before lunch or after lunch. So do we rely on an algorithm or an automated score to be more accurate, or do we rely on a human to be more accurate? And again, it depends on what we're optimizing for. Are we optimizing for accuracy and consistency, or are we optimizing for rights, empathy, sympathy, and some kind of humanity in systems that maybe we allow people to have a second chance, even if that's not mathematically the right solution in this case? So I think this is a really great paper, an example of where research in this space is progressing. I'll end very quickly. I think what we're now seeing in this space is a real plethora of ethics guidelines, because companies have got to governments very quickly and said, oh, you shouldn't regulate us because you're going to be curbing innovation. You're anti-modernity, you're anti-progress, and you're actually coming in the way of innovative solutions that will actually grow the GDP, grow economies, provide jobs. So you need to not fetter algorithms and AI, you need to actually let the market decide. So you should just leave us alone, basically, and we'll self-regulate. And anyone who's actually seen how well regulation has worked out in financial markets is sort of getting, shudders on this, and their hairs are standing up going, I'm not really sure self-regulation works in this space. But we now have a zillion ethics guidelines instead, with people saying, we don't need something legally enforceable, we'll just have ethics which are soft norms, which can allow for contextual differences, which don't respect universal guidelines, and we can cherry-pick norms based on which region or which country we're operating in. It can sometimes be very cynical when companies do this, because the same company that will adopt a view saying, we don't actually care about your local laws and norms because we're a global company, we'll go based on California law or Delaware law, and we'll have a one-size-fits-all approach because the First Amendment or the Second Amendment matters more than anything else. So never mind your Mickey Mouse Banana Republic laws, we're going to just go with one set of norms. But when it comes to a set of norms that they would like to violate, then suddenly it's all about, we don't really need to care about privacy because the Chinese aren't private, Indians aren't private. And to this I always say, seriously, how many of us tell our parents that we're gay? How many of us talk about having beef when we're outside the house? Do we tell them we smoke weed? Do we tell them we're dating Muslims? We don't. So this idea that Asians, Indians, Chinese don't care about privacy at a fundamental level, that we're about collective norms, we're Confucian societies, we don't care about individualistic, romantic Western ideals, is a real myth, and it's a real framing problem. So I'll end very quickly here by saying that I actually had a lot of pictures, but oh, here we go. In a space where we're talking about ethics and there's a concern that it's ethics washing, just like we've had greenwashing and all kinds of other things, I think we really need to be aware, but I also find, to be fair about ethics, it can actually be the sort of gateway drug that gets people into the room, because if you tell them you need to talk about regulation, companies and governments won't sit in the same room. But if you talk about something softer like ethics, it's actually an easier way to discuss norms and to align values before you can actually talk about legally enforceable rules. I'll leave you with a couple of more playful examples, which is, this is MIT's moral machine, and I think one of the biggest examples we see in this field is the trolley problem, which I think if you actually talk about the trolley problem, guarantees are that you're not actually a machine learning specialist, because they never talk about it. It's all the other social scientists in this space that do. But it's the one thing that's a very seductive example of, would you let the trolley keep running and kill the person that's in the track, or would you actually pull the lever to kill a different set of people? And MIT came up with this game called the moral machine, so you could come up with scenarios to actually play with different, flavors of the problem, or you could actually be the judge, saying if you were the one to pull the lever or not, what would you do? And it was meant to actually explore and investigate how difficult and nuanced these decisions can be, and how the expectations we have of AI and algorithms might be a little unfair. So it could be everything, now that it's multilingual, you've got everything from, the doctor or the old lady, or classic on the internet, dogs versus cats, who would you kill? I think we all know the answer to that. Or if you're a Brexit fan, it could be Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Hunt. I think currently the answer is both. And I think this is a really interesting example. This is how we imagine the trolley problem, that we're the one in the driving seat. But the way that a lot of these systems work, we're actually the one in the line of sight, and we actually have very little agency in actually operating or pulling that lever in any of these directions. Another game that's really interesting is this one, which a few students have come up with. It's called Survival of the Best Fit, and it actually explores bias in hiring, and it actually reveals how a lot of implicit bias can come out in the way that we make decisions about which school people went to, how prestigious it is, what their skills are, what we look at outside of their academic credentials. So this is, again, a game that you can play to look at how nuanced and difficult this kind of algorithmic decision-making can be. And then finally, this is one of my favorite projects, which is about the sort of tyranny of, surveillance in the guise of fitness apps, which companies give out to you as your bonus for Christmas, not because they care about your health, but because they'd like to ensure their insurance premiums stay robust and healthy. And if you're a fat couch potato watching television, then maybe you shouldn't be covered by the company's scheme. But Surya Mattu came up with this great project called Unfit Bits, which is all the different kinds of levers and pulleys and games and toys that you can use, which is about saying, have the healthiest lifestyle you can imagine, freed from the actual data that your apps generate. So you can continue to watch Netflix and binge watch whatever cereal you're doing, continue eating those fries with cheese, while the apps are doing all the work for you on all of these drills and pulleys and generating whatever number of steps you'd like to set as your target. So it's saying free your fitness data from yourself. So it's called Unfit Bits. And I think the reason I'm mentioning all of these is I think they're really great ways of engaging with really deep, profound questions of algorithmic bias, of decision-making, of automation, in ways that make them accessible to people who really don't have a say in how these systems are designed. And I'll leave you with this final thing. If you look for if you look for AI, you usually get all these blue, shiny pictures somewhere between a motherboard and a person, like motherboard versus brain. Usually blue, usually very sort of sci-fi looking. But if you actually, what I found this morning when I was looking at this is if you have your safe search on. If you don't have your safe search on your browser, you actually get this, which is really interesting. It implies that all that AI represents is highly sexualized Asian fembots, and that's the sort of traditional representation or the highest searched, with one little thing for ex machina in the middle of it, but the rest of it is all kinds of, really weird pornography involving AI. So depending on what your preferences are, safe search or not. But again, if you look at utopias and dystopias, the utopias are all sort of, these amazing futuristic cities. Dystopias are exactly the same, but a little darker with a little more soot and a little more smoke. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. But what I found disturbing in Asia was they were very Western imaginations about what the future looked like. So we launched a product and a project at the Digital Asia Hub saying, we all have a stake in imagining the future. What does it look like if your metaphors, your pop culture frames of reference don't include Orwell and Kafka? And if that's not how you look at the future, what would that look like? So we ran a speculative sprint project. We got authors, musicians, interpretive dancers, all kinds of people who don't think about AI and algorithms to actually imagine the future through speculating and writing about it. And we actually came up with this book called Drones and Dreams, which I would love you to read. And it's up there. And it actually comes up with all kinds of ways in which people have imagined the future. And we leave you with a whole set of prompts around how you can actually play with this. So you could have little, prompts about Alexa, Siri, and Google Assistant are ladies who lunch. What do they talk about? Or, your AI child is really worried about the kind of food it consumes and it shouldn't be conflict diamond infested. What would you give it as an advice column? So these are ways that we've actually engaged with questions and had people write about them. So I'll leave you with this to play with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malavika, for confronting us with the contradictions of our current present and mainly to the threats and also the possibilities of the future, of the technological future. And now we will move to our third presenter. We are really pleased to have Monroe Price here. You should all know that he has just arrived in time. There's always behind the screens stories in the conference, and he really making in time. So we are extremely happy to have Monroe Price here. He's the director of the University of Pennsylvania Center for Global Communication Studies. He's also the director of the Stanhope Center for Communication Policy Research in London. He's a long-standing scholar with a huge experience in this field, so I'm happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to say first what an honor it is to be on a panel with Malavika and with Yoni, two persons who really fight for the maximum freedom possible, and I think live up to the kind of ideals of IAMCR. I also think it's really interesting to have this panel and this conference at this moment when I think so much is at stake in terms of governance of new media, artificial intelligence, etc. There seems to be a kind of coalescence of decision-making in some way. And with now antitrust becoming more and more salient. And I think these provide great issues for the IAMCR to explore in the future. I'm going to experiment here with this group. I've worked to provide a video of this presentation. I'm not sure why I hope it's not too narcissistic to do it this way, but I felt this would be an interesting way to deal with time and subject matter. So I'm going to turn it over to the video, but why don't I do that right now?
Yeah.
This video was made by Kyle Cassidy of the Annenberg School, who's a great videographer and great human being. I get music as well. That's one of the great aspects of this. Every several decades, there are dramatic new technologies that require a new cast of thinking, and this seems to be such a time. Dramatic shifts in geopolitics, in technology, and in institutions have yielded many efforts to rethink the relationship between media technologies and freedom. There are many rivulets to this set of ideas, and I have tried to think of these issues in part through several concepts: strategic infrastructures, strategic narratives, and the complex operations of what I have called the markets for loyalties. Let us start with strategic infrastructures. Everywhere about us, we see the material remnants of historic approaches to thinking about technology and freedom. Through them, we can assemble a catalog of techniques used to mobilize societies. Fax machines in dissident Eastern Europe, audio tapes in revolutionary Iran, flash drives in Cuba, smartphones in Egypt. Of course, these technical interventions are sometimes with the goal of expanding freedoms and sometimes with the goal of restricting them. And Architects of these strategic infrastructures include those who seek a flow of images that reinforces sovereignty, those who wish to lower barriers to entry globally, those who wish to ration the import of potentially destabilizing advocacy, and those who consider their state to be vulnerable to communal violence. Of course, some architects are those who advocate a full and free independent marketplace of ideas, and this has been a dominant discourse in early discussions of the internet. And we shouldn't forget the designers of satellite systems and underwater cable structures. They too are architects of infrastructures. But it is not the hardware alone that defines a strategic infrastructure and its freedom-related potential. Cell phone towers, surveillance cameras, satellite dishes, and flickering television sets do not and never fully tell the story. One needs to know the legal and policy setting. Freedom is the combination of technologies themselves and the institutions that surround them. A few examples of information infrastructures can help explain the complex relationship to freedom. Take the satellite and cable system of Singapore, which permits large-scale access to information necessary for a modern business society, but combines it with an explicit set of norms and the machinery to enforce them. The now obsolete Dutch system of allocating broadcast time to ensure pluralistic values in a society is another example. And in more modern times, we have concerns with internet shutdown capabilities, as in Ethiopia and Cameroon and Kenya, and especially during election cycles. Ithiel de Solapool wrote brilliantly about technologies of freedom, but the burden of approach I've taken is that no technology is intrinsically an instrument of freedom. Indeed, some technologies of freedom have had Trojan horse effects. By design, they have become engines of surveillance and betrayal. I turn now to what I call strategic narratives. How a society is made to think about itself influences what policy it adopts. And what we call narratives are a theater in which these positions are honed. Narratives of fear and destabilization, for example, lay the groundwork for more cautious and restricted regulatory outcomes. And narratives of freedom embolden participation and encourage entry. Here are some examples of creators of strategic narratives. The Freedom Online Coalition is a consortium of states that recognize the need for a narrative to foster adherence to a relatively strict regime of non-intervention in the regulation of social media. Ukraine developed a strategic narrative related to its own and Russian propaganda, and also related to Ukraine's use of technology to further some voices and restrict others. The EU seeks a bedrock narrative that will support its ongoing effort for internal strengthening and its capacity to advocate for freedom throughout the member states. But there's an important point I've learned about the political economy of strategic narratives and their relationship to freedom. What's worth examining is not only the operation of a single strategic narrative, like the narrative of the need for free and independent media, but the mix of narratives, their interaction, their changing patterns in production, and their relevance to our general theme of technology and freedom. For example, it has been a difficult time at the moment for narratives of freedom. In Europe, the idea of a liberal democracy has grown, often at the cost of institutions that were constructed precisely to advance pluralism, to advance the rule of law and independence, basic aspects of freedom. This is mirrored elsewhere in the world, including, for example, Myanmar, where promising narratives of freedom dimmed. And the impact of narratives turns partly on geopolitical trends. China and its Belt and Road Initiative gain a significant narrative focal point, much like the Marshall Plan of the late 1940s and 1950s, as that plan sought to further ideas of democracy and freedom in post-war Europe. Quite important in this analysis is the concerted attack that has taken place on the very engines of narrative that are most supportive of freedom. In the United States, the press, or major elements of it, are characterized as enemies of the people. In Russia and elsewhere, NGOs, often the backbone of civil society and instruments of freedom, are outlawed and harassed. Delegitimization has become a hallmark of narrative production, and computational propaganda has industrialized delegitimization. We need to think more about the loci of a narrative's invention and the institutions and organizations behind the narrative. One could say that Russia invested heavily in its RT channel as a cauldron of narratives, and it has been a surprisingly effective investment. China has organized its global television network to render more available states' perspective on global news. And the U.S. has rebranded many of its efforts as the U.S. Agency for Global Media. We have to distinguish, however, between what I might call freedom to produce narratives as opposed to the production of narratives of freedom. Finally, I have written in the past about markets for loyalties, where competitors for power are large-scale entities, states, religions, movements, ideologies, and political parties. All those for whom myths and dreams and history can be converted into power and wealth. In their ongoing shuffle for allegiances, these sellers use technologies, in conjunction with other tools I've mentioned, such as forced law subsidy, to expand their sway and to facilitate or limit entry for others. As I have discussed, these sellers and markets for loyalties project strategic narratives and implement strategic infrastructures to further their case. And often they organize a cartel of imagery and identity among themselves, frequently with the help of the state. The operation of such markets can help us understand the relationship between technology and freedom. Take, for example, the struggle between the center and Catalonia as a case study in how a market for loyalty works here in Spain, and how vying sellers use a repertoire of tools to alter the passions of audiences in the market. The center, we can call it Madrid, at many points used law, force, subsidy, and technology to drive home the idea of a more unified Spain, limiting the capacity of the Catalan movement to expand and entrench. And when, as in Barcelona, a pro-independence party was in control, it used its authority and leverage similarly, deploying technology such as control of public television and other mechanisms to reshape political allegiances. Freedom has a specific meaning in each such market. Yoni Sanchez turned simple flash drives into technologies of freedom to enable thousands of Cubans to read or watch what would otherwise be unavailable. One more example of the relationship of law to technology will be helpful. Many sellers in markets for loyalties rely on an important principle in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. There, the right to receive and impart information is applicable explicitly, regardless of frontiers. But we've lately seen the impact and influence one state or strategic communicator can have in the flow of information in another state. We've seen transfrontier propaganda play a large role in Ukraine and in the US election. In the next decades, if information warfare and propaganda expand, what control will the home state demand? In other words, what is the future of the regardless of frontiers principle, and who should decide? I choose this principle to discuss because we may in fact be in for a period of information mercantilism. In a period of populism, some political leaders emphasize control of immigration as a necessary element of statehood. And similarly, there's a populist turn in control of the export and import of goods. States asserting sovereignty will increasingly use borders to restrict, even more than now, the flow of ideas. States act, justly or not, to immunize their population from what they consider destabilizing ideas and advocacy, often to maintain power. Picasso's monumental Guernica is one of the most famous and powerful paintings of the 20th century. It was painted by the artist in response to the bombing and near annihilation in 1937 of a small Spanish town in the Basque Country. The bombing by the Nazis was authorized by Franco for testing of German technology for aerial warfare. I think of this painting as a meditation on anxiety in the face of the brutal technologies then being unleashed. Why show this painting? For me, it captures the desperate unease with onrushing technology and its potential to crush the human spirit. It is about the power of creativity and resistance. We are at a different moment of a different onrushing technology in a differently uncertain world. Guernica could be a metaphor for our efforts as scholars and citizens or citizen scholars. Sounding an alarm, reaching beyond the ordinary, absorbing and reflecting the perils of dangerously collapsing norms. In the search for technologies of freedom, there is need to help a wounded society cope with dramatic and bewildering change.
Yeah, we have two questions. Okay. Okay, so after this really insightful video full of contemporary and global reference, we are ready for opening the floor to your participation. We will include a slight change in the order because we will be starting with participation coming from the online audience that we are having. I'm happy to invite Nancy and Urba to present some of the conclusion or the discussion that has been going under our Twitter hashtag, which is #AskIAMCR. They will be presenting part of the discussion and also some questions to our presenters.
Yeah, this question is, I'm Nancy Brian Mbaya, and I'm one of the LOC scholars from Nigeria. This Twitter user said, in pop culture and films, AI is many times portrayed as malevolent and decides to eradicate humans. Although these films might be fiction and might be reflection of reality, can we guarantee that machines won't reach this decision? Number one. And let's not forget that AI analyzes big data, statistical behavior, and models past human history. If we take this into account, would it be that irrational to think that robots could actually reach this decision? Thank you.
I think it's more for you.
You want to take a few questions, or?
No, there are. We can go with this.
Yeah? Okay. I think the sort of classic example here is, in terms of images, you have the Terminator image, which I think is the first one people think of. And I think it's also weird because it sort of embodies AI in a very physical form, and I think it also addresses one of my pet peeves that people use AI and robots interchangeably, even though they're not the same thing. But I think one of the classic problems in this space is that if you told an AI to actually do something efficient, it could end up making paper clips forever and ever and ever if you asked it to do it efficiently. And I think there is a notion that AI left unchecked will end up in some kind of weird singularity and end up killing the entire human race. And I think that's the entire reason why you need law, regulation, ethics, social norms to actually prevent that happening, even if you don't believe in the singularity. I think something like the singularity or the eradication of the human race is such an extreme example, but I'm really worried about near-term consequences of technology that already exists here and now, that is in our phones, that is in all of the technology that we use, that is in the banking decisions we make, and actually making sure that those are fair, non-discriminatory, and accessible to people is a much bigger challenge for us than worrying about the inevitable sort of destruction of mankind. I think all of the attention needs to focus on all the minute, small, banal ways in which it can actually discriminate and affect mankind very profoundly.
Thank you very much. We have received one question also from the audience. Please don't forget that you can present your questions. We have our LOC scholars, international scholars that are willing to distribute you the paper to write down your questions, and I will transfer that. And this question is in line with what has been treated right now. It's about how can people behind the machines be more visible in all these processes. And I would also like to invite the section and working group heads, if they also want to share their questions, they can stand up and come here to the microphone to also to present them. But in the meantime, I'm coming back to this question about how people behind the machines be made visible. It relates with the materiality and the human impact of that. So you can, all of you, elaborate a little bit on this.
Okay.
This is the same question. I think you should answer it.
Yeah, it's in the line of the human materiality.
Of the human.
Yeah.
Well, I think the question of the human behind the scene is really one of could be considered an issue of narrative. That is to say, how do we depict it? It seems to me that in general, this issue of who's behind and who's in front is ambiguous and is always interpreted, and there's always another level of determination of how this is constructed. And I think it will lie with the dramatists of the future as well, and the poets of the future, the people who contributed to Malavika's book on alternative ways of living and seeing, to think through these perilous, difficult issues.
I also would like to know your position, Giovanni, in this issue.
Sí. Voy a ir a una referencia literaria, quizás porque soy de formación filóloga, ¿no? Y es Isaac Asimov, el maestro de la narrativa de ciencia ficción, que imaginó un mundo donde la inteligencia artificial o los robots tuvieran leyes que no pudieran violar. Y la primera de ellas era justamente nunca poner en peligro, dañar o afectar al ser humano. Yo soy bastante optimista en ese sentido. Creo que inscrito en la genética de la tecnología futura tendrá que estar fundamentalmente el vivir para servir al ser humano, para apoyarlo y para potenciarlo, no para afectarlo. Así que creo en eso, aunque comparto con mi colega las aprensiones sobre el uso de la información personal y de los datos de los seres humanos por las máquinas. Pero soy optimista como Asimov. La inteligencia artificial y los robots tendrán sus leyes inviolables.
Okay, we receive another question that is also more close to Malavika's presentation. Is if you can elaborate a little bit more on the formalism trap. That's one of the traps that you were presenting, and the formalism one. Yeah.
I can actually read it out because it's the one that I'm the least familiar with. Do you want to take one of the other questions while I do that?
Yeah, I mean,
while you're looking, I recently saw Fritz Lang's movie Metropolis, which I recommend to everyone as a film that thinks a lot about these issues of robotic, artificial intelligence, and humankind. So that's a plug for Fritz Lang.
Yeah, I think we also have one more question coming from our Twitter account.
Okay. Hello, my name is Urwa Tariq, and I'm from UAE University, from UAE, one of the cosmopolitan and a conservative country. My question is for Malavika and Joanne. There is not a question, but a comment made in Twitter, and it's a very deep statement. Someone said that I fear Siri now. She's more like a spy. And this reminds me of one of the incidents which took place in Dubai, and it was published in a newspaper under technology session, and it became a very famous incident, where one of the young students was having an informal meeting with her friends, and she asked her Siri a very silly question: where is my soulmate? After a week, she had a presentation in a conference, and she opens a YouTube account under her account, and suddenly an ad pops up saying, "Hey Zainab, are you single?" So she said that this was one of the most embarrassing moments of her life. So the question actually here is that there has been a perennial debate recently about digital devices that are listening and tracking us for push notifications, and predicting our needs without our consent. So what are your thoughts on that, and can this be sorted out legally? And lastly, how much of personal information can youth be sharing in digital media?
I think that,
Bueno, voy a responder desde mi experiencia muy personal. Cuando uno ha nacido y ha vivido en un país donde siempre está siendo escuchado, donde el gran hermano observa a los ciudadanos y especialmente a todo ciudadano que emita una crítica, lo mínimo que le ocurre es que le interviene en la línea telefónica, le pinchan el celular, lo vigilan los vecinos. Cuando uno ha vivido así, le da hasta un poco de gracia las cosas que hace Siri. Está claro que Siri puede evolucionar a una interferencia mayor en la vida, pero ojo, ni Siri es el que más fisgonea o vigila. Siri es un fenómeno de un número reducido de millones de personas en este planeta, no nos engañemos, ¿no? Porque en primer lugar tiene que está relacionado también con las potencialidades de conectividad. Intente usted preguntarle algo a Siri desde Cuba, que no va a tardar un mes, va a tardar un año en responderle, porque las velocidades de conexión no permiten ni siquiera la interacción con Siri. El peligro nuestro es el otro gran hermano, ese que no pertenece a una corporación, ni a una empresa, ni a una compañía, sino que pertenece a un gobierno.
Sorry. The reason I didn't really talk much about the formalism trap, I've just come out of the hospital and I was having a senior moment, but I remember all of it now. It's about how there are sort of interoperability issues when people don't use definitions and framing exactly the same way. So one is whether mathematical notions of fairness could be very different from legal notions of fairness, and implementing them in socio-technical systems could actually be played out in very different ways. The other formalistic issue is around whether in legal systems it's not outcome-based alone, like machine learning systems are. It's also about process. So you need to see justice being done as opposed to just ensure that that's the outcome of a long process. You might have to have your day in court. You might have to have other kinds of procedural protections that are as much a part of the solution as the ultimate outcome that you reach. It's also about a more formalistic notion of fairness would imply that you also have to have it be contestable, that you need to have rights of oversight, you need to be able to appeal against it, which isn't necessarily something that software wants you to do. It doesn't want you to keep interrogating or questioning the finality of a decision. So all of those are more formalistic aspects, apart from the fact that people just can't agree on definitions of what is AI, what is fairness, what is discrimination, because from a mathematical and a computer science point of view, you always discriminate. You sort, you categorize, you put things into buckets. That is discrimination. But from a legal point of view, discrimination really is about unfair discrimination or illegal discrimination, which is a smaller subset of it. So all those are the more formalistic ideas, and when you fall into any of those traps of contestability or formality or procedural issues, then your system might fall into one of those traps and not actually achieve the fairness that your system should. Thank you.
Your question reminds me a bit of Shoshana Zuboff's new book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So I'll plug that as well as Fritz Lang. And a phrase that she uses a lot, I'm not sure she invented it, called behavioral surplus. So the idea that every person is exuding information, which is seized and then exploited by capitalism in some way. So I think there's nothing, your case of Siri and this question is just an outlier in this large-scale move to behavioral surplus. So maybe that's her soulmate. She should call him behavioral surplus.
We have some questions coming from the floor. They are referring to the Rule D3 for companies operating in the free markets, the oligopolization and the work from Eli Noam's on media ownership, concentration around the world. The question would be that how is communication, education and policy dealing with all this phenomenon of concentration, oligopolization, and that.
Well, I think this is an interesting question of disciplinary training. And I think our profession, communication studies, has been called upon serially to learn new technologies, new bodies of knowledge, like artificial intelligence. Very few people in the field have been developed. Each school has had to somehow step up its capabilities in some way or another to take into account the digital move, digital transition. And I think that I was trying to point that economic analysis is going to be very interesting and very important in the next several years as governments focus more and more on the anti-competitive aspects of the industrial structure at present. And I think some schools have done this, and there's certain cooperative efforts, etc., but this will be more and more necessary.
What would be the role for a communication research association in this scenario? What's your opinion about what can IAMCR do to promote
I see that IAMCR and Janet Wesko and have been very innovative at developing groups that make it flexible and make it nimble and able to work on current problems. And I think that's a great way to go.
Yeah. We have also one question that is also addressed to Mauro, but I guess that it can also be appealing to all our presenters. That is related with the Trump policy and attitude towards the freedom of press in the US and the relation with mainstream media, New York Times. And the question is quite direct. Is there no freedom of press at the USA, or is it at risk?
At risk is certainly, I would not say there's no freedom of press. There's a lot of freedom of press, but it's at risk. In the talk, I talked about the effort, in a certain sense, to silence intermediaries and proponents of what I call narratives of freedom. For example, the NGOs around the world that press for press freedom are outlawed. Contributions to them are outlawed, often criminalized in Russia, in Israel often as well, and that hasn't exactly happened in the U.S. But it's not good that the press is called enemies of the people. Mm-hmm. So that's a place to start.
And I guess that any question regarding freedom of press is also can be also addressed to Joanny's experience and thoughts about this.
Bueno, sí. En el caso de Estados Unidos me es difícil opinar porque no vivo allí, ¿no? Pero sí puedo decir que en el caso cubano estamos a años luz de poder decir que solamente está en riesgo la libertad de la prensa. No. La prensa, la libertad de prensa en Cuba no es que esté en riesgo, es que a nosotros nos han matado el periodismo. Ese periodismo que puede investigar, que puede tocar una puerta, que puede interpelar a un ministro, que puede llevar al estanquillo de la esquina un periódico que no sea controlado por el partido en el poder, eso nosotros no lo tenemos. Entonces, lo que ha pasado en los últimos años es un fenómeno positivo, que es la aparición de medios independientes. Pero son medios muy precarios, no están legalmente reconocidos, no se les permite entrar a las instituciones, los periodistas independientes son frecuentemente arrestados, su material de trabajo confiscado, y los sitios digitales para los que tributan, pues están bloqueados. Entonces, yo creo que nuestra libertad de prensa está en estado embrionario, a ver si logra nacer para después ponerse en riesgo, porque ahora ni siquiera en riesgo están.
Mm-hmm. Which are your thoughts in the Asian contest, Malavika, about freedom of press?
I think it's under challenge in ways that is not just about stopping speech, it's actually stopping lives. You know, people are being shot, people are being killed in Bangladesh, in India, and Sri Lanka, and so many places for investigative journalism, for reporting on corruption, reporting on environmental issues. Gauri Lankesh in Bangalore, so many, many, many people. And I think one of the bigger problems when this happens, apart from the deeply felt loss of journalists, is the self-censorship that it creates. And I think if you don't have spaces where you can assemble and protest and actually feel that you can express yourself with constitutional rights that protect you, I think it's sort of a race to the bottom as more and more countries are trying to surveil you. And I think even the ways in which people are then moving to encrypted platforms, I think when they move to things like WhatsApp, where if they're worried about how they will be silenced on more mainstream open platforms, the discourse moves to WhatsApp, which raises other issues around whether all kinds of other evil things are being plotted online. And then when governments try to actually have an impact on this, they end up trying to undo encryption, which is the one thing that actually protects free speech and the privacy of communications. So I think there are multi-pronged attempts to fight this, and of course you have governments that are very keen to implement all kinds of really strict draconian laws to tackle something like the alleged fake news phenomenon, which then also has an impact on journalists who have to register, who have to be regulated. And I think that's again a really disturbing trend in Asia, when countries think that they can use disinformation as a sort of Trojan horse to regulate speech that is unpopular, where they're very quick to take offense, and disinformation is a very blunt tool to actually curb all kinds of opinions being expressed about governments and about people in power.
Okay. I just say one thing, which is, what's the trend? And the Center for Media at Risk, properly named by Barbie Zelzer, thinks about a lot of these questions, and they need to be thought of in more places, in more consistent ways.
Yeah. We would like also to invite all the sections and working groups to also express their position. I think we have some colleagues from the law section that would like to pose a question.
Thank you. Yeah, Rodrigo Cetina from the law section. This question is actually for Ioanni, but should I do it in English or Spanish?
You can do it both.
We can do both.
Yep.
Perfect. So, yeah, I'll do it in English and then I'll tell it in Spanish. So, we're talking about technology, and certainly from the Cuban perspective, we still see the clear potential that technology and communication technology has for liberation, for freedom, right? But we're also talking about the potential technology can have for oppression. I just wanted to ask you a very descriptive question. If you could talk about, in the context of the people that use the internet in Cuba, if you could tell us a bit about what technological capabilities the government has for surveillance or for censorship, just the technical means. Decía que desde la perspectiva cubana ciertamente se ve todavía las tecnologías, se aprecia mucho el potencial que tienen para liberar, ¿no? Que es un potencial que está ahí. En otros países nos preocupa mucho actualmente el potencial que tienen las mismas tecnologías para oprimir, ¿no? Entonces, solo era una pregunta que quería, pues, una pregunta más o menos descriptiva de qué capacidad tecnológica tiene el Estado cubano para vigilar, censurar, oprimir en Internet. Sabemos ahora que, no sé, las cámaras de vigilancia, otras cosas son a coste cero prácticamente, ¿no?
Bueno, tiene mucha capacidad, porque tiene la capacidad que le llega por dos lados. Uno, el lado de la inteligencia, o sea, la seguridad del Estado. Recuerden que la inteligencia cubana fue formada en las aulas de la Stasi alemana y lleva 60 años operativa la seguridad del Estado cubana. Por tanto, tiene un gran bagaje de herramientas para el día a día, prácticas de cómo extorsionar, manipular, amenazar. Todo eso, además, llevado a las redes a través de tecnología. La mayoría de esta comprada a China, incluso se han tratado de imponer en el país algunos métodos chinos de controlar la información y la libertad de Internet, como por ejemplo crear pseudo herramientas para sustituir las herramientas universales. Se ha creado una variante de Facebook, una variante de Twitter, una variante de mensajería instantánea. Afortunadamente no han logrado imponerlas, porque ya los cubanos conocíamos las otras herramientas. Hay una universidad de ciencias informáticas al sur de La Habana, donde se forma la mayor parte de los ciberpolicías o militantes combatientes de la web. ¿A qué se dedican? Distorsionar los debates. Cuando los debates en los foros o en los chats alcanzan ciertos temas puntuales, política, liderazgo, ellos distorsionan estos debates, amenazan a activistas en las redes, suplantan sus perfiles, hackean sus cuentas de Gmail y se dedican a aparentar que hay más apoyo popular del que realmente tiene el sistema. Esas son algunas de las técnicas. Podría estar agregando otras, pero en cuanto a escucha telefónica, filtrado de datos, tiene absoluto poder. Por eso, en Cuba, que somos casi todos un poco ingenieros sin diploma, somos muy hábiles en uso de proxies anónimos y servicios VPN. Entonces, a cada muro la gente ha encontrado su manera de saltarlo. Es difícil, estresante, tienes que estar todo el día pensando en cómo tapar tu rastro en Internet, pero afortunadamente se logra mucho a pesar de eso.
Muchas gracias. Now we have another question coming from the audience section. Asta.
Asta Zelenkovskaite, I would like to ask a question when considering the computational propaganda questions that we're dealing now. So how can we deal with audience participation that can be subverted by automated forces and bots? And basically the question, the broader question is how can we analyze the activism that can be subverted by, Russian trolls or other kind of forces? What could be some answers we can have? Thank you.
Sorry. I'll start out by saying I don't have answers. Certainly, the only answers I have are how we've failed so far at dealing with this kind of question. There was a big article in the New York Times just yesterday about the European efforts to deal with disinformation through a rapid response team, and how, despite the effort to say how important this was, it has utterly failed at trying to make a difference in some way. I think people are confused by problems with free expression, the technology aspect of it, et cetera, so that we don't have a suitable answer yet. I'm sorry to have an indefinite answer to a definite question.
I think one potential opportunity is to actually get more data out of the private companies and platforms that hold it. A lot of times they say it's proprietary and they're unwilling to share it even for academic research. But I think there are small, narrow ways in which they are cooperating with civil society and with academics to actually share this. And I think this comes with the growing recognition that they can't solve these problems alone. And I think as they're facing liability, as they're facing penalties and fines in the US, from the European Union, in Singapore, all over the world, I think they recognize that the scale of these problems is so complex and so huge that they require help from academia and civil society. So I think they are forging more meaningful alliances. The Social Sciences Research Council has partnered with Facebook and others to actually get access to a lot of to the whole fire hose rather than just, sanitized data sets. So I think there is great work that can be done, not just to see sources of disinformation or sources of hate speech and violence online, but also whether countermeasures to tackle them are effective or not, and to see what works and why. So I think that's something that I see as promising.
I would also like to pose a question that is linking to the recent history of IAMCR. Last year in Eugene, in Oregon, the topic, the conference topic, was focused on the sustainability of environmental sustainability. We are dealing here with all the invisibility of the material part of the digital societies, and also would like you to reflect on the relation with the environment and the natural and human impacts that these digital societies and these digital trends are having, and how do you find them?
Well, I think here the question is how to train a new generation of PhD students turning their attention to environmental questions. I know that at Annenberg we have a wonderful student who's studying rare earth aspects of computer production, computer destruction, et cetera, and it demonstrated again, as with artificial intelligence, how the field has to learn more about auxiliary fields to do the work it wishes to do here. So to do communications policy, one had to understand mineral flows, structure of computers, et cetera. And I'm sure that that's true in other areas of climate change and communications. So they're the standard issues of impact and effects, but there are definitely areas where having more intimate scientific knowledge is extremely important. And the question is how, again, to combine within the umbrella of a department these various disciplines.
I think on 3 levels. One is, I think, in terms of the framing, if we actually think of a lot of technological systems as environmental hazards or systems with externalities, I think that's a really useful way to look at the impact of these new technologies, unintended consequences of them. So I think that sort of environmental metaphor is very useful to think in terms of ecosystems, to think in terms of public health issues, whether it's addiction, mental health, other kinds of things engendered by these technologies. I think the second one is looking at the actual environmental impact of things like blockchain. To mine coins is hugely environmentally harmful, just in the amount of electricity that's consumed. So I think that's something that is actually a very tangible connection. I think the third one is to reimagine how we do conferences in this space. We're all flying all over the world, burning up the ozone layer and everything else. And I think we're communication specialists. We should be disintermediating conferences. We should be doing them in a completely different way from where we are without flying, right, all over the world. It means we can actually do our day job without taking 7 days to recover from jet lag. But I also think that there is a fairness component in that, because not everyone gets to participate and have a voice and attend these events, especially when they're in more expensive countries. So I think if we can actually democratize conferences and make them accessible, it's going to change not just the environmental impact, but it's going to change representation and inclusion and diversity of the people and the actors in this space, which I think is what we should all be trying for.
Thank you. I also like to question you about, in this invisible part, which are the consequences and the implication for the working force that is lying behind all these digital societies, because we tend to forget. We were talking about the human behind the machines, but also the one that humans that are producing all the systems that are working. And I would like you to think and to reflect on the global inequalities and where is this digital society produced and consumed, and that's.
I think some of the most exciting work on this is coming from people like Mark Graham at Oxford, who's really studying the gig economy. Young PhD students like Nupur Raval at UC Irvine, who's looking at food delivery apps in India, who's looking at the ride-sharing economy, people looking at content moderation policies in parts of Asia. I think that's really useful and important work to actually lift the lid off what automation actually is. And I think it's kind of, I like loops and I like meta things. So for me, it's very interesting that all of this started with the mechanical Turk, with the actual person sitting inside, the carapace and the skeleton trying to do calculations, while it was an actual human pretending to be technology. Then we have Mechanical Turk as an actual platform that serves out small gigs to people who are betting for it, 0-hour contracts and all the other sort of labor law violating ways in which small jobs like this are handed out, the sort of menial end of the sort of algorithmic spectrum. And I think it's very interesting now that we're actually questioning and interrogating those kinds of 0-hour contracts, those kind of gig economy platforms, and the ways that human labor is actually involved in the alleged production of technology. And I think the fact that it's disproportionately poor people in developing countries doing this is something that can't be ignored. When all the profits go to Silicon Valley and all the emotional labor is being done somewhere else far away in the world because the laws are easier, the norms are weaker, it's easier to get away with these things. So I think labor law is really interesting. Consumer rights are really important. And I think fighting for equal pay in a lot of these contexts is really important. It's not enough when we talk about it only when the US, football team wins, which is also very important, but also in ways that wages affect all of these, whether they can afford health insurance, whether they get therapy. I think it's really important that accuracy levels when people have been working 10, 12, 16-hour shifts, what does that do to the content that's either taken down or stays up? I think those are questions we need to be researching.
And the regulatory framework, how can be the national borders either better or surpass in this? Is there a kind of global regulation or trends in the communication policy and technology?
I think unions are more important than ever, and I know it's unpopular to say this in many more capitalistic parts of the world, but I'm very happy to say it in Spain. But I think they are really, really useful in actually doing collective bargaining around these rights. I think there are all kinds of tech equity collaboratives that are coming out. It could be in places like Oakland around whether Square should move there, and whether you have sort of not just gentrification of physical space and where people live in order to perform these kinds of tasks, whether they can afford to be there, but also other kinds of digital gentrification and redlining. So I think collective action and collective bargaining is really useful in this space.
Yeah.
Monroe may have many more legal
I was
solutions.
going to ask you in the last question, what happened to the body of research on gentrification in Bangalore? What's that great work that was done on copyright, Bangalore, and gentrification? Do you know that work?
No.
I'll send it to you. Okay. No, I don't have anything else to add.
You want to?
Sí, cuando uno recorre Latinoamérica es increíble porque en un mismo lugar de Latinoamérica te encuentras los dos extremos, el emprendedor, la pequeña compañía local, el empresario que logra levantar cabeza gracias a la tecnología y está generando empleo, está generando servicios, está generando esperanza. Sobre todo estoy pensando en Centroamérica, donde hay tanta y tanta gente que el proyecto de vida es escapar por falta de oportunidades, por violencia. Y por otro lado, casi a 1 metro de distancia, te encuentras entonces todo el fenómeno que produce muchas veces la minería extractiva de los materiales que van a hacer al final convertirse en esos dispositivos. Gente cuya expectativa de vida se limita muchísimo, su calidad de vida se limita, por estar realizando labores en unas condiciones con un nivel de intensidad y sin derechos sindicales que es como el lado más tenebroso de la tecnología. Y eso en un mismo país.
Okay, I think we have one more question from the floor, Claudia.
Thank you, Claudia Padovani. I'm co-chair of the Working Group on Global Media Policy. So I would like to pick up on what was just said in terms of the relevance of unions and collectives. And I do agree actually that codes and voluntary measures are certainly not enough when it comes to ethics. But I would also like to know, beyond or together with collectives and unions, when it comes to we need regulatory mechanism, how do we see the role of the different institutions that may be working at different levels? And so I haven't heard here speaking about the role of the different international institutions that may be UN agency or ICANN, or so what's their role? But then in the context of the kind of challenges that we're facing, I'm also wondering, are we witnessing the emergence of conditions that may be leading to a convention for right-based developments of technology? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that off. I think that in this whole sort of plethora and this sea of multiple instruments that are coming out, UN organizations are not new to this, but I think the OECD has recently come up with AI guidelines that actually distill a lot of what's happening in the rest of the space that a lot of countries are actually subscribing to. So that's a very promising development. They were just released a few weeks ago. UNICEF is trying to do something specifically on AI and child rights to see how a human rights respecting framework can be used. Other UN bodies are also looking at this intersection of automation, AI, and human rights. And I think a lot of people are looking to international institutions here, and that's why I'm very grateful you brought this up, because they see this as something that actually transcends borders, transcends governments, and they're actually hoping that the UN system, especially because human rights are at the core of these systems, will actually be the only game in town that can actually talk about rights when even governments are embarrassed to discuss human rights. Governments are speaking in the language of innovation. Governments are talking about different kinds of progress narratives, and in many parts of the world are embarrassed to actually use even existing human rights frameworks and remedies, because again, they sort of buy this Kool-Aid that it's getting in the way of progress in their respective countries. So I think a lot of people are asking for some kind of a Geneva Convention on AI. People are asking for some kind of, at least in terms of autonomous weapons and the sort of militarization aspects of AI, that there should be some kind of a moratorium spearheaded by these UN institutions. Equally, there is some talk of learning from international multi-stakeholder institutions to come up with solutions. So 2 examples that I heard last week. One was looking at how Interpol shares data, saying, fine, you might want to share data across national boundaries, but doing it in a very narrow frame for a very specific targeted purpose is a very different thing than companies doing it because they want to actually harness data of all their customers, and that is actually embedded into their business case. The second example was around Kern, saying if some of these problems involve huge computational power, but also the resources of many scholars worldwide, just like physics problems were tackled at Kern by an international collaboration of scientists, is that a model that would work in this space to look at algorithms and AI and actually have a collective approach to this? And could something like the UN spearhead that kind of an initiative as well? So I think one sort of set of arguments is that we do have an existing human rights framework which has teeth. It's 70 years old, it works. Plus we have tort law, we have liability under existing legal systems, we have consumer protection, we have labor law. We don't need to reinvent the wheel for new technology. It's kind of like Lawrence Lessig's paper on the law of the horse. You don't need a law of the horse when you have all these other things that can regulate different aspects of the horse. So I think those are all like really useful frames, but I think people are clamoring for some kind of, to get away from the soft principles of ethics and to actually have enforceable remedies under something that could either be a supplement to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or something that actually takes it one step further.
I think there's an interesting question of who sets the agenda now, and where is the funding coming from?
Yeah.
And where is the funding coming from? Corporations, established foundations? I mean, you might reflect on, I don't know how Berkman thinks about this. Is Europe a source of funding that's projects that are different from those of the foundations? I think there's a kind of slight falling away from faith in human rights that definitely, certainly the United States has not remained a leader on human rights kinds of issues. And so I think that colors the possibility of using that as well.
I agree, and I think that's also, you see a lot of companies embedded in this space who are either lobbying against regulation or lobbying for certain kinds of watering down of norms. Even when we recently had the Christchurch call for action after the events in New Zealand, companies wrote their chapter of that way before civil society got to look at that draft. So I think there are these kinds of imbalances as well.
I think the Christchurch call is probably a really good example of opportunity to think about these kinds of questions.
Okay, I think that it's 12:30. We have been enjoying a fruitful plenary session. I would like to ask a big round of applause to Joanny, Malavika, and Monroe for this stimulating conference and conversation. It's clear from all of us that communication and technology must work together to achieve freedom.
Fantastic.
And we have an exciting horizon. Next year, we will have the IAMCR conference in Beijing, which is challenging in these terms. And even closer, we have our lunch time. Please remind that there are 4 counters. The first one will be serving the vegetarian and celiac menus. 2, 3, and 4 will be open for regular menus. And thank you very much for your attendance, and we will stay in touch for the next of the conference.